having summarized and taken a look at 1966, some of the music there, the singles, and the album Revolver, let's head in to 1967, the spring and summer of 1967, as I call it, on the way to the summer of love. Well, we talked in the last video about how after that last concert in August of 1966, the band decides to take a break and they return to recording in December of 1966. During that break, each of the guys gets involved in doing something to kind of give them some change of pace from what they've been doing with the Beatles. Remember how they've been working so hard up to this point that they hardly ever had a day off when they weren't doing some kind of a Beatles thing. That's part of what that thing in the Philippines was about. They didn't want to go to this reception for Imelda Marcos because they finally had a day off and they wanted to be able to relax and not show up at some official event. So now they decide they're going to take some time off and just kind of relax a bit. So what they ended up doing is John acts in a movie directed by Richard Lester. Must still be on pretty good terms with Richard Lester. This movie called How I Won the War. Paul writes music for a television drama called The Family Way. George studies sitar with Ravi Shankar, and Ringo just kind of hangs out. He goes to Spain where John is filming How I Won the War, but that's kind of boring. He comes back home, just kind of does his Ringo thing. The official decision now is that the band's touring days are over and the studio is now their principal workspace. So the next album is going to be one that they determine is going to be an album all the way through, that they have to make no concessions to live performance at all. It's an album that could never be played live. This is the idea that's circulating. So as a result of this turn to the studio, the music becomes increasingly experimental, although we've seen plenty of experimental stuff up to this point. And recording and production tend to be dominated by John and Paul, because now really it's about taking a John song or a Paul song and sort of producing it out into the finished version. And so for Ringo and George, there really are lesser roles for them. I mean, when a band is gigging all the time, all four members of the band, like the Beatles, are constantly involved in everything that's going on. But when you're recording, one guy's writing a song, another guy's writing a song, and the other guys are sort of sidemen to sort of help with the arrangement, that kind of thing. It really does create a different kind of balance, not only of power but also of activity. Ringo has complained about sort of sitting around, learning to play cards or drinking tea most of the time, while Lennon and McCartney were working these tunes out. So you're starting to see the first inklings of the split that's to come, and it happens because the basis on which these guys had been held together, part of it, the live gigs, is now gone, and there's a new dynamic in the studio, and it's not the same as it was before, and maybe is not as satisfying for two of them as it is for the other two. Well, the singles that we're looking at in this time coming up to the summer of 1967 are Penny Lane, Back with Strawberry Fields Forever. These tunes were actually recorded fairly early on in December of 1966 as part of what was going to be an album about their childhood and teen years and that kind of thing in Liverpool. When I'm 64 is another song that had been recorded early on in December, a song that goes back to Paul's earliest days as a songwriter. But then it turned out that the label wanted them to release something as soon as possible, maybe in February, and they didn't really have any singles for them because they sort of made this dedication to this album project. And so they ended up releasing Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields as a kind of a double A-sided single, but then that threw the plans for the childhood album kind of out the window because their policy was not to include singles on albums that would follow. So the idea was that Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields probably shouldn't be on the next album, and so that kind of changed. So we'll talk in a minute about how the concept changed from childhood to Sgt. Pepper. So anyway, Penny Lane, the Paul song, Both these, releases A and B side or double A side in February of 1967. Penny Lane goes to #1 in both the U.S. and the U.K. And as I said before, deals with childhood in Liverpool. Penny Lane is a district that the guys, a district of Liverpool that the guys John and Paul lived in. There's a roundabout. You can still, if you take the Beatle tour in Liverpool, see the roundabout that he talks about. You can see the barber shop. All these various kinds of things are still there, and something you can imagine what they would have looked like to these kids back in the early 60s, the last half of the 50s. It uses the familiar lyric structure that we've talked about, of the sort of unfolding of various images. But let me just save that for the close-up when we get to it and talk a little bit about that more in detail. Strawberry Fields Forever, another sort of John song that deals, another song that deals with Liverpool, and the John song that goes with it. Again, Strawberry Fields being a kind of park that John used to play in and was close to where he lived. And again, another place that you can go visit now in Liverpool and see what he's talking about. Anyway, Strawberry Fields can be seen as a kind of an extension of Tomorrow Never Knows. But again, that's another one that we'll spend some time on in a close-up coming up. So let's get back to that then. All You Need Is Love, when we get to the summer of 1967, is the big single of the Summer of Love that's not on the Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club album. In other words, the album comes out, and the single that's released with it, or at about the same time, is All You Need Is Love. The album is released in June of '67. The single is released in July, and we'll talk a little bit about that one when we get to the close-up as well. The B-side of that is Baby, You're a Rich Man, written together by John and Paul. A song that maybe reflects the idea that at one point, as they were wanting to retreat from public view, they considered buying an island. I think an island off the Greek coast or something like that, so they have some place where they could go where nobody could get to them. So as we look at the shape of the Beatles releases over the course of 1967, leading up to the fall of '67, we get Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane in February. We get the release of Sgt. Pepper in June. We get the release of All You Need Is Love in July. And so now let's take a minute, or take the next video, dedicate the next video to looking at Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in some detail.